Hi, I am Tabitha Cooper, and I'm going to go ahead and do kind of a review of, I guess, my thoughts on what rhetoric is and some of the things that we've read. So I feel like the big daddy one that kind of got us through that first part was something a lot of us already probably knew, which is Aristotle's understanding and kind of creation of rhetoric, and this idea that in order uses rhetoric to persuade an audience. And so everything since Aristotle's article about the three, the ethos, pathos, and logos, kind of centers around this idea of how do we persuade by looking at all angles, right? Like looking at the problem, looking at the audience, looking at how the audience is going to kind of react to our presenting of materials. And so everything we've read, I feel like since Aristotle, like just terministic screens, identification, the power of the audience, language in general, all of those aspects, the idea of discourse and what truth is, what language is, that all kind of centers around Aristotle's discussion of rhetoric and the three main ways in which people persuade, right? Through your reputation, through emotion, and then through logic and facts. Although Kairos is also closely related to that, which I feel like Aristotle most definitely talks about Kairos, this idea of time and place and its importance, but he never names it by name. So when we read that article about Kairos and just the idea that Aristotle didn't think about it, or at least didn't name it by name, I thought that was really powerful because Kairos is like my favorite of all persuasive techniques. So I thought that was cool. Just in general, rhetoric being a way in which to persuade, and that the best kind of speaker can use several different types of rhetoric. But before they even sit down to talk to people, there's so much planning and prepping when using rhetorical like modes of persuasion. So I thought that was really interesting. Things that we would think is common sense, but there's something to be said about really thinking about your audience, really thinking about every word you use, and what works best for one audience might not work for another audience, I guess, which I thought was really interesting as well. Our discussion on identification, I thought was really interesting, and just language as a symbolic action, the words we use and the words that we choose not to use according to our audience or the company we keep. And that's just, as a teacher, if you're an educator, kids are going to talk to you differently than they talk to their friends, or they may talk to you differently than they talk to a different teacher. It's all about the choice of language based on who you're talking to. Um, I do want to say that, like, out of everything we read, though, about rhetoric and how rhetoric is used, and then taking what we've learned and analyzing works that use rhetoric, my favorites were probably The Master's Tools. Will never dismantle the Master's House. This was one of my favorite reads. I thought that was really interesting. I didn't really think that I would be as interested in the medical rhetoric, but it was phenomenal. I was really, really impressed with that. I also felt like the rhetorical situation, this article, although it seems like it is pretty common sense when you're speaking and you're trying to kind of somewhat manipulate people or just persuade them, that you look at these three aspects before you begin discussing or talking. You really look at like the problem, the emerging issue, and then you look at your audience and you look at your constraints. And so, like in my Padlet, I talked about my example from like a rhetorical issue or situation was just recently, like my school district was a part of the lawsuit to get rid of masks, right? So that was a huge situation when everything kind of came down from the judge saying that Governor Pritzker could not tell schools they had to wear masks. So I look at how our superintendent dealt with that situation, and we have something coming down the pipe. We have this issue that the judge has just said you don't have to wear masks. Okay. Who is my audience? Well, my audience are parents, they're teachers, there are nurse, there are other administrators, there is our school board members. And then what are the constraints? Well, we have a lot of people with a lot of different views. And so I'm sure his concern was If I scrap the masks, who's not going to come to school? If I don't scrap the masks, is there going to be a huge rebellion? So it was such an interesting way to like look at that rhetorical situation and see how like somebody in a place of power deals with an issue, an audience constraints. I thought that was really cool. I did also want to say like this is the book I read for our literary review, and it was so good. Um, this April Baker Bell makes a really compelling argument that Black language, what a lot of teachers in inner city schools or just schools with a variety of different ethnicities, that they have forever been telling students who speak in what they would call like slang language, which is actual Black language. They're denouncing that language. They're saying, don't talk that way. That's street. That's ghetto. You need to have proper English. Well, her claim is that that is actually Black language. It was kind of a conglomeration of a variety of different languages that came together when slaves were not brought over, they were forced to come here. And so enslaved people took Main Street white language, they took what they learned and what their language was in Africa, and they kind of meshed them together. So her argument is teachers should not be telling Black students that they can't speak Black language because that is indeed a language. It should be taught. There are grammatical rules to Black language. She goes through and just talks about how we are denouncing their culture. And she does talk about how there is a difference between slang and Black language. And I just thought it was really interesting because she went to school in Detroit, she taught in Detroit, and then she went back and did her doctoral research in Detroit public schools. And so this was a really interesting read, and the use of rhetoric in it was pretty amazing. So I really enjoyed it. But that is my review of what I think rhetoric is, and hopefully it made some sense. Thank you.